G'day guys, in this video I'll show how I go about creating a face frame using mortise and tenon construction for a chest of drawers that I'm building for my younger sister for a chest of drawers and change table type thing. It's going to have 7 drawers in the front. It's going to be 2 drawers in the bottom, 2 drawers in the middle and 3 drawers up the top. I've got all my components laid out here the way that I want them. I've got best face up and I've also marked which is the face, so I've just put a little squiggle on each of the boards to mark that that's the face. So now I need to put tenons on the ends of these rails, and I also need tenons on the end of these internal divider stiles. On the 2 end stiles I need a bunch of mortises to accept all those tenons, and I also need mortises in the middle of these rails to accept the tenons on these verticals. So this divider will be exactly centre of this rail here. So the first thing I'll do is I'll establish a centre line. I'll just get myself a ruler, make sure it's flush at the end of the board here. The easiest way I find to do that is to get yourself a square, butt it up against a timber, and then just move the ruler into the edge there. Measure the overall length, which is 840mm, so make a mark at 420. Then I'll quickly lay out some of the details for the tenon on this lower divider there, just so that I can use those details and transfer to the rail. Now this is a 20mm thick piece of timber. I'll be using a 1/4 inch tenon, so 20mm minus a 1/4 inch, let's call it 6.5mm just to make my life a little bit easier. 20mm minus 6.5 equals 13.5mm, divide that by 2 equals 6.75mm. So if I get my marking gauge here, turn it on, it's a digital marking gauge, very good gauge, move it to 6.75, okay, 6.76, close enough, line that up there, just make a mark, one there, one there. And also I want to make a mark dead center of this stile here so that I can line it up with my center mark that I just made before. So that's 42mm wide, so half of that's 21. And now I can line up that center mark here with my center mark that I put onto the face of the bottom rail, and then using these 2 scribe lines there I can just make a little mark there and a little mark there. Now I know I need a mortise inside here somewhere. So now using this lower rail I can use these marks as a template to transfer those marks to this rail to accept the mortise under that edge there. Then I'll just transfer these marks, and that gets me the location for the underside mortise. But I also need a mortise on the top to accept the next rail. So I get my square and square a line up. And then I'll do the same thing for the second top rail. Using those marks there, square them up at the end there. And there I have my center set of mortises all marked out, ready to go when I take it over to the router table. Then I need to put the 2 mortises into the top edge of this second rail and the lower edge of the top rail to accept these 2 dividers in there. Now I know that the center of that divider there lands 277.5mm in from the ends. So if I just put a mark 277.5, and the same thing from the other side. Then using this lower divider that I marked the 2 sides of the tenons, I can line that up with the center marks there and bring the marks down for the edges of the mortise. Then naturally enough I bring this panel up, or this one down, and transfer those marks across. So now I have all of my internal mortises marked out. Now I just need to mark out the mortises for this stuff. And then if I push these out of my way, bring this rail back over, making sure the tops are lined up again. Flush them up. And transfer all of those other marks to the other side. And there we have our mortises marked out. The tenons I don't need to mark out, I just do that with the stops on the saw. But here I've got the mortises marked out, so then now I can move over to the router table and cut the mortises first. It's not the best method in the world, but it's something that I'm not overly comfortable with, but I'm not uncomfortable with it, so I'm just going to do it anyway. So what I've got is I've got a 1/4 inch upcut spiral bit installed in my router. I've got that sitting about 7mm above the table at the moment. I need to create a 16mm deep mortise, and I could cut that in one pass using a 1/4 inch cutter, but I don't want to. I'd have to feed very, very slowly, and even doing that, because I'm feeding by hand, I can't feed consistently enough that there's a good chance that I'd break this cutter. So I'm going to cut it in two and cut like 7 or 8mm first cut, and then I'll raise the bit up a bit, and then I'll cut it in a second pass. On these spiral bits, which have been milled out with a CNC machine, there is a perfect point in the center there where this flute meets the other flute. Now I've marked a center line across my timber there. If I line that up with that center point there, that will probably get me close enough to be within somewhere between 0.1 of a mil and 0.05 of a mil. So very, very close. And if I'm out by a little bit, I can just do a test cut, give it an adjustment, and then fix it from there. But this is the way that I'll set it up from now. And so now I've got the start and finish of my mortises marked out on the timbers here, so that when I lower this here, I need to know where to lower to. First off, I just want to put a piece of tape next to the pieces here, not under it. I don't want it to be anywhere near under it, so I want a good millimetre away from the surface. Stick that down nice and tight. Check that I'm not under the surface. That's good. So now if I get myself a square and roll this cutter so that it's pointing this way as much as I can, maybe a little bit more, maybe about there. Put that there and square a line across. Same thing for the other side. So now I'm ready to get these routed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put that up against the edge there, gently lower that down, following the first line onto the first line, lower that down, fully plunge it, move across, get to the second line onto the second line, and then instead of just lifting up from there, I'm going to move back just a little bit, a millimetre or so, and then I'll lift it up and away. So there it is, there's a matching set of mortises there. These are for the two side styles. They'll sit there like that. Now, I say matching, but they're not entirely matching. They're matching with regards to, they're all the same depth, about 16 mil. The slot is all 1/4 inch wide, and the slot is all central to these 20 mil wide panels. But the length of each mortise will vary just a little bit because I've only eyeballed it versus against these pencil lines. So probably within 1/2 mil. Let's make some tenons. There's only a couple of things that I need to be critical about. Firstly, the thickness of the tenon must match the width of the mortise. So the mortise is a 1/4 inch wide, 6.35 millimeters wide, so the tenons have to be 6.35. But I'm going to have to test fit that to make sure that it's right, because if you get any spindle run out on your router bit, you might have a wider slot. If the router bit has been sharpened a few times, it might be a little bit less than 6.35, etc, etc. So we're just going to test that to fit. The other thing I need to be critical about is the shoulder length of these vertical dividers. It has to be right. It can't be, it can be very close, but it can't be pretty slap happy close. It has to be, it's supposed to be 156.5. And when I've got 1, 2, 3 at 156.5, plus this rail, that one, and that one, all of that should equate to the length of this style here. We don't want to be short and we don't want to be too long. I can fix it if I do either of those things, but who the hell wants to fix anything? Not this fatso. So for the joiner, I'll be using my ripping blade, which is a 30 tooth blade. It also has a flat tooth profile on the top there, and it's a very aggressive blade to use, but because it's got a flat top tooth profile, it's suitable for joinery. You just have to be a little bit careful the way that you cut things. Make sure you're not ripping the bottom edge apart. Using things like a zero clearance insert is a great idea. I don't have zero clearance inserts on this, and if I measured that, I've probably got 1/8 of an inch between the side wall of my table there and the blade, so plenty of room for tear out. So we've got to take things easy. So when I make these tenons, I'm just going to have the timbers hard down on my slider, and I'm going to pass it over the blade several times to clear away the waste. All I need to do is I need to figure out how high the blade needs to be. So I'm looking for a 1/4 inch tenon, which is 6.35, from a 20 mil piece of timber. So 20 mil minus 6.35, let's call it 6.5, because we'll err on the side of caution and make the tenon a little bit bigger, then we can creep up onto it. So 6.5 is 13.5 mil, divide that by 2, 6.75, set that on my handy dandy marking gauge. Here we go, 6.7, that'll do it. And just scribe a line across the bottom there. So then I just set my blade to be that high and give it a test cut. You want to make sure that the blade is at the top of the arc when you're testing it. So I push it into the blade and then roll back and forward just so I can see where it's hitting. So now I want to take a couple of test cuts just on the very end of the piece, let's say cutting 2 millimeters into the timber there, just so I can test it into a few of these mortises. I don't want to just test one mortise, I want to test several mortises so that I can get a best case scenario across all of the mortises, because there might be slight variances in these mortises themselves. It wouldn't be much, but it might be very, very tight to kind of loose. So we want somewhere in between that. So then I can test the very end of that into the mortise, and sure enough it's too big. So just to give me some kind of an idea, I just want to measure with verniers, and I've got 6.82 millimeters. I'm looking for 6.35, so I need to come up a little bit. I'll just reach down and raise the blade up that little bit and try again. Less is more in this case. When you go too far, you take too much. So it goes in there and it's pretty well flushed top and bottom. So that's not too bad. So the last thing that I'll say about these tenons, cutting them this way using a very aggressive blade, whether it be a ripping blade or a dado blade, they're all fairly aggressive. You want to cut your shoulder lines first and then clear away the excess waste around the tenon. You don't want to start on the very end of the board and move your way up to the shoulder line, because you'll end up with slightly more tear out. What happens is when you're cutting a groove into the middle of the timber there, the timber fibres are supported from both ends. They're actually bridging the gap. So in order to break out, you kind of have to wrench it right out of there. But when they're just on the end there, all they need to do is fold straight down. Very easy for that to happen. So you always cut your shoulder lines first, then clear away the waste. So after rounding off the corners of the tenons, I've gone through and assembled this, dry assembled. There's no glue in this at the moment. I've checked everything. It's square. All of these are square inside there. Everything's lined up. These spaces, this distance here is the same distance here, so that I haven't bellied out these top or bottom rails. Everything's good to go. So technically I can glue this up now, but the first thing I need to do before I do that is I just want to run a couple of grooves down the side of these side stiles to accept the tongue that I'll put onto the side panels, the side MDF veneered panels, and that will sit inside there. It's how I'm going to connect the face frame to the side panels. That'll go into there like that. And that'll be the side panel with the side of the front stile. Now I've made sure that the stile sits actually sits proud of this veneered surface. That way I can bring this surface down to the veneer, because I can't take anything off the veneer. The veneer is only 0.6 of a millimetre thick. If I try to sand too much of it to bring it down level to another surface, I'm likely to sand all the way through it, and as soon as that happens I've got to scrap the whole project. Well, scrap this piece of panel and start again on this panel. So I'm about to glue this thing up. The only thing that I need to worry about is some of these tenons are quite tight and I might need to get the hammer and smash down hard on this surface there. And because there's a groove there, if I smash too hard with a hammer, there's a good chance I'll just crack that because it's straight along the long grain there. So you just got to keep that in mind, that gently does it. So let's get this glued up. I've got all the pieces sort of lined up, and I had a theory, I had a plan in my head how I was going to do this. Oh, that's right, I was going to top to bottom. Alright. Get an ice cream stick, put some glue into the mortise. I don't need a lot of glue with this, like this is a very strong structure. And to have heaps of glue just means heaps of cleanup. So a little drop of glue inside there and in there. That's all I need. Get this one in there. Get that seated properly. Get the number 2. Get that in there. Went in there nice and easily. You'll notice that I don't put a lot of glue onto the tenons itself because I'm not trying to get huge amounts of glue onto this piece. And if I do put glue onto the tenons, when I push that on, most of the glue gets scraped off from the mortise itself. It just gets scraped clean off, which then puts it up onto the shoulder, which then squeezes out, creates a mess, and you've actually gained no strength from it. So. But if you really wanted to put a lot of glue onto it because you're worried about the strength of the structure that you're making, then yeah, sure enough, you do that and then you just clean up the cleanup later on, or clean up the squeeze out later on. This one's giving me a little bit of a fight because there's a little bit too much glue in there and it's pushing back on me. If I get it clamped, I can bring the pressure up and that'll push the glue out as it's done right there. So this is where I need to be gentle when I tap this in because I can break that off. I want to focus most of my blows onto the outside face where it's still solid. So you get a fair amount of open time with this glue because so long as you get the glue into the hole and then the tenon into that hole again on top of it, you actually seal the glue up from the atmosphere, and it takes a little bit more time to set. For example, like I leave the glue in these glue bottles and there's a hole in the top, so technically there's air can get in and out of that, but I can leave that glue bottle there for an entire year and it still won't go off. So that doesn't mean you can leave this for an entire year, like an extra few minutes, not like hours. And with this I don't want to put a lot of pressure on there because the more pressure you put on it, all it does is it bellies it out that way, and which opens up your joints on the face side, so we don't want that. All I want to do is I just want to pull the joints together And that's enough. It's not like when I'm doing a edge-to-edge lamination for a tabletop or something like that. That way, when I do that, I always put a lot of pressure on there because I put a lot of glue on there as well. And so I want to get rid of all the excess glue. And the only way to do that is to bring the pressure up to force it out of there. Alright. So that's looking pretty good. Might just get a clamp over that. But before I put that in the way, I'll just check that it's square. 1122. And if I hook onto the edge there, not the clamp, I have 1122. But it was a little bit long on this side, so let's try to adjust that just a little bit. That's a lot better. Alright, let's see. Now I'll put a clamp over that just because I need to. And so, out of curiosity, I have my style length at being 670.5 using this tape measure. Through the centre here I should have 670.5. 670.5 as per the usual. So I've taken this face frame out of the clamps about an hour after I put it into the clamps, and that's how I make a face frame using mortise and tenon joinery. I really should have made it out of pocket holes so I can say pocket holes just like that. But it's mortise and tenon together, rock solid, gonna last a million years. Looks good, is good. Smells like timber, that's not too bad. Pretty good. So if you're interested in seeing how this finishes up, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll be uploading many more videos with regards to building this thing, how I get there, what tools, processes, methods, problems I encounter when I get there, how I get there, if I get there. One would assume I'm going to get there. Anyways, thanks very much. Big thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested in seeing more, and share this video around with anybody you like. And just before I go, I will accept there's more than one way to skin a cat with regards to building a face frame. You don't have to use mortise and tenon connections because they are the best for this thing, but dominoes are perfectly fine, pocket holes are perfectly fine, biscuits are perfectly fine, dowels are perfectly fine. You can screw and glue it if you want, but you'll have exposed screws in the end there, which, okay, it's not unacceptable, but you kind of have to cover up the screw holes because it looks kind of manky. But if you're painting it, perfectly fine. Get a nail gun and just go. See you.